Good morning and happy Tuesday. Welcome back to another edition of RoxomTV News. Our top story this hour: the ceasefire in Gaza remains fragile as negotiations over its next phase continue, with Israel and Hamas accusing each other of repeated violations. Large-scale fighting has largely subsided since the truce brokered by the United States in October, but military activity has not fully stopped. And that reality is keeping tensions elevated on the ground, even as diplomats push to extend the agreement. According to reporting from the Al Jazeera and Reuters, Israeli strikes have continued intermittently since the ceasefire took effect. Gaza authorities and ceasefire monitoring groups say those strikes have caused casualties and damaged infrastructure. Israel says its actions were defensive responses to Hamas violations and ongoing security threats. Both sides insist they are adhering to the core terms of the ceasefire, and both sides blame the other for breaches that could unravel it. Now, that mutual distrust defines the current moment. It is against this backdrop that U.S. President Donald Trump has stepped up to pressure on Hamas to disarm. Let's take a look.
Well, we talked about Hamas and we talked about disarmament, and they're going to be given a very short period of time to disarm. And we'll see how that works out. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner will be in charge of that from our side. But if they don't disarm, as they agreed to do, they agreed to it, and then they'll be held to pay for them. And we don't want that. We're not looking for that. But they have to disarm within a fairly short period of time.
Now, President Trump's warning reflects Washington's push to move the ceasefire into a second phase. That phase would involve longer-term, calm reconstruction efforts and new governance arrangements for Gaza. U.S. officials say Hamas disarmament is central to Israel's demand for security guarantees. Without it, Israeli leaders have warned they would resume military operations. Trump has framed the moment as a narrowing window, a choice as he presents it between political accommodation or renewed conflict. American officials argue that reconstruction funds and international involvement will be difficult to sustain if Hamas retains full military control. Now, Hamas has rejected disarmament demands. The group says it will not give up weapons under pressure and frames the issue as resistance rather than governance. Trump's comments came after a meeting with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where areas of the agreement and disagreement were both on full display. Let's take a look.
Well, we have had a discussion, big discussion for a long time on the West Bank, and I wouldn't say we agree on the West Bank 100%, but we will come to a conclusion on the West Bank.
If I could ask, what is the disagreement?
Well, I don't want to do that. It'll be announced at an appropriate time, but he will do the right thing. I know that. I know him very well. He will do the right thing.
While the U.S. and Israel remain closely aligned on Gaza and Iran, the meeting underscored that differences persist on broader regional issues. And those differences are most visible in the West Bank. Let's break this story down, okay? You see, in December, Israel's government approved legal status for 19 Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank. These include a mix of newer outposts and older settlements, some of which had previously been dismantled. Now, the decision formalizes communities that were once considered unauthorized under Israeli law. International reaction to this has been swift. Britain, Canada, Germany, France, Japan, and several other countries issued a joint condemnation. They said the move violates international law and risks worsening regional instability. Those governments warn that settlement expansion undermines efforts toward a negotiated solution with the Palestinians. Now, Israeli officials rejected the criticism. Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar said the decision reflects Israel's security and national interests. He argued foreign governments should not interfere in matters related to Jewish settlement in the West Bank. Supporters within Israel's governing coalition framed the move as strengthening Israel's claim to disputed territory. Palestinian officials condemned the decision. They say legalizing settlements further fragments the West Bank and weakens prospects for a future Palestinian state. Now, the timing adds diplomatic sensitivity to this. This decision comes as Gaza ceasefire talks remain fragile and as the U.S. pushes for broader regional de-escalation. Analysts warn the move risks opening a separate diplomatic front, one that exposes lingering divisions between Israel and some of its closest allies. Now, another point of tension surfaced just yesterday. Trump said he had been told a pardon for Netanyahu was on its way, referring to the Israeli prime minister's ongoing corruption trial. Trump described Netanyahu as a wartime leader and questioned why clemency had not already been granted. Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, quickly disputed that claim. Now, Herzog's office said there had been no direct conversation with Trump about a pardon. It emphasized that any decision would follow established legal procedures. Under Israeli law, the president does have pardon authority. But there is no precedent for granting clemency while a trial is ongoing. Netanyahu denies charges of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust dating back to 2019. He submitted a formal pardon request in late November, and the request argued that court proceedings interfere with his ability to govern during wartime. The timing followed the Gaza ceasefire and aligned with efforts to advance a broader U.S.-backed diplomatic framework. Now, the episode highlights how legal, political, and security issues are now tightly intertwined. And the impact of the ongoing instability is also being felt beyond politics and diplomacy. Israel's technology sector, a central pillar of its economy, is showing signs of strain. According to the Israel Advanced Technology Industries Association, 53% of tech companies reported an increase in employee relocation requests over just the past year. Many of those requests involve workers employed by multinational firms. The tech sector accounts for roughly 20% of Israel's GDP. It represents about 15% of jobs and more than half of the country's exports. That makes it unusually sensitive to talent movement. Now, the report also notes that some of the multinational companies have examined relocating parts of their operations abroad. In some cases, supply chain disruptions during the war revealed alternatives that proved efficient. There are concerns, however, that some activity may not return. But at the same time, the sector has shown resilience. 57% of companies reported stable operations. 21% expanded during the conflict. Industry leaders say the situation remains manageable. But they warn that prolonged geopolitical uncertainty could accelerate talent loss over time. It adds an economic dimension to Israel's security debate. What happens in Gaza is not only shaping diplomacy and military planning, it is influencing investment decisions, workforce confidence, and long-term competitiveness. Now, as far as my thoughts on this goes, this is what a pause looks like when nobody actually trusts the pause, okay? The Gaza ceasefire is functioning less like a peace agreement and more like a loading screen. Everyone is waiting for the next phase, but no one agrees on what the rules are once it starts. The U.S. wants disarmament. Israel wants security guarantees. Hamas wants legitimacy without surrendering power. And in the middle of all of that, civilians are living inside a ceasefire that feels temporary by the very design. The West Bank decision didn't exactly help. Neither did the public talk of pardons during an active corruption trial. Layer on economic strain in Israel's tech sector, and this stops being a single-issue conflict. It becomes a systems problem. Security, governance, law, economics, and credibility are all colliding at once. And ceasefires don't collapse because of one violation. They collapse because too many unresolved issues pile up at the same time. And right now, that pile is getting taller, not smaller. We're taking a quick break, but when we're back, we're going to be joined by our first guest of the day to talk about what's going on in Russia, so you won't want to miss that. More RoxomTV news coming your way after this quick break. Wish you could grab cash without selling your Bitcoin? Yeah, same. But hey, that's why Ledden exists. They're the global leader in Bitcoin-backed loans, over $9 billion issued since 2018, with a perfect record protecting client assets. Now, what makes a Ledden loan different? Well, with custody loans, your collateral, it stays put. They don't go degen and lend it out for yield. There are no credit checks. It funds in under 6 hours. No monthly payments. You can repay anytime with zero penalties. And for transparency that grown-ups actually want, proof of reserves reports every 6 months verified by a top accounting firm. The bottom line here is Ledden lets Bitcoin holders unlock liquidity without selling. And you can check them out at ledden.io/RoxomTV. That's LEDN.io/RoxomTV. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Currently, the Bitcoin price is sitting right around that 88K level, and our top Bitcoin story of this hour comes from Russia, where the country's largest bank, Sberbank, has issued the first ever crypto-backed loan. The bank released a statement on its website stating Sberbank carried out a trial pilot transaction to provide a loan to a cryptocurrency miner, Intelion Data. Now, the collateral was digital currency mined by the miner itself. And in the transaction, the bank used its own in-house solution for cryptocurrency custody, utilizing the hardware-based Roxom system. Now, this ensures the safekeeping of the asset for the duration of the loan. And Sberbank's deputy chairman added, in Russia, regulation of the digital currency market is only just beginning, and we are ready to work in dialogue with the central bank to develop relevant regulatory solutions and build the infrastructure needed to launch such services. He continued by saying the pilot transaction made it possible to test mechanisms for working with digital collateral, which could form the basis of future regulation. We believe that this product will be relevant not only for cryptocurrency miners, but also for companies that own crypto assets. And after further investigation into Intelion Data, our team confirmed that the company is primarily a Bitcoin mining operation and mining infrastructure provider that sells and hosts ASIC hardware and operates large-scale mining data centers. Now, while some hardware listings on its website reference solutions for other proof-of-work coins, the company's public operations and narrative focus specifically remain on Bitcoin mining. Therefore, it is fair to assume that this was Russia's first ever Bitcoin-backed loan. Just last week, on December 23rd, Russia's central bank announced it is developing regulations to open Bitcoin and crypto trading to retail investors. And with more news emerging from Russia, this move is a major indicator that the country is taking steps toward broader Bitcoin adoption. Now, joining us to talk about this story and others during this first hour of today's show is someone who's been building Bitcoin infrastructure quietly, deliberately, and very much on purpose at a time when most people are still arguing about price charts. He's the founder and CEO of Bitcoin Well. Please welcome to the show, Adam O'Brien. Adam, welcome. How are you this morning? Thank you for joining us.
This is an exciting one.
It is, and let's get right into it because we've got a lot to talk about. So, Adam, Russia's largest bank just issued what appears to be its first Bitcoin-backed loan using BTC mined by a major mining firm as collateral. From your perspective, is this a genuine step toward Bitcoin integration or more about the state figuring out how to control it? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully not the latter, but it's certainly anytime Russia does anything that I think is, like for anything other than Russia's betterment, we have to maybe take a pause. I don't know that it can harm anything. I think that broadly speaking, Bitcoin is the supreme collateral on the planet. I think that anyone who's not offering Bitcoin-backed loans or accepting Bitcoin as collateral to issue a loan is missing the point. They've lost the plot. And so this is a natural evolution. I think this is actually part of, the promise of Bitcoin is that it puts governments in competition with each other. And Russia realizes like, oh, hey, even our authoritarian regime will not be able to survive without supreme collateral, without Bitcoin. We're going to be one step behind. So I don't know, is Bitcoin the new space race where all the governments are like scrambling behind the scenes trying to figure out how they can play their part? Who knows? But I think this is a step in the right direction. And, obviously Russia wants to control it. The states obviously want to control it. Canada is just like playing in a sandbox somewhere looking at weird fairies. And so we're not doing anything serious here. But I think the serious governments are actively looking at Bitcoin and trying to figure out how to incorporate it at a national level.
Yeah, it's becoming too big to ignore, and I really love the space race analogy. That's pretty good. The only thing is this will be even easier to fake than a moon landing because AI is making that all a little too easy at this point. Back to the story, though. In this particular case, Adam, the Bitcoin collateral stayed in the bank's own custody system rather than with the actual borrower. So my question for you is, does that still meaningfully validate Bitcoin as collateral, or does it undermine the whole self-custody principle that Bitcoin was kind of built upon?
Yeah, I think it's unreasonable for borrowers to be able to maintain full self-custody. That's an incredible trust where all the risk lies on the lender. I think there are interesting multi-sig arrangements that can happen. If I have a key, you have a key, and some third party has a key, then that's a good solution. But frankly speaking, the bank has collateral. Like, the bank can kick you out of your house anytime it pleases if you have a mortgage against your house. And so I think this is probably par for the course. When you want to have the benefit of the Bitcoin without actually selling the Bitcoin, it's going to cost something. And right now that cost is custody. I'm bullish on the future of multi-sig arrangements to not require borrowers to give up their custody. But I think for right now, that seems pretty reasonable. I obviously am a self-custody advocate. From my perspective, Bitcoin not in your control is not really your Bitcoin. It's not real Bitcoin. And you run the risk of having paper Bitcoin that way. But from my perspective, I think that's a reasonable thing to assume, is that when you want a loan for your Bitcoin, you have to give up some custody.
Yeah, it does kind of beg the question though, right? If banks start accepting Bitcoin as collateral while still controlling the keys, does that move us closer to Bitcoin adoption, or just kind of recreate the same trust risk that Bitcoin was ultimately designed to eliminate?
This is the right question. And I think that ultimately the greatest risk on the macro to Bitcoin is the control we're giving to banks, to governments, to lending facilities, and that centralized kind of problem that's going to exist. Ultimately, when you give up custody of your coins, you're giving the other person permission to do with them what they please, even if it's not in their terms of service. Possession is 9/10 of the law. We know this. But also, I think there's a deeper problem here, and so we've seen Wall Street manipulate. We're all shocked that Bitcoin's not $250,000 right now, right? Everyone can't believe, with all the Wall Street adoption, with everything going on, why isn't Bitcoin worth more? And I think that it's right to assume that's largely because of the fiat games that Wall Street gets to play now with our market, with the price of Bitcoin. And so if Wall Street can manipulate it, and the banks are going to sell the Bitcoin at certain price levels, it's reasonable to assume that we can create this short squeeze, or the opposite, where we can create this massive flash crash, which will separate retail, separate individuals, separate you and I, who have responsibly taken a loan out instead of selling their Bitcoin because of this "don't sell your Bitcoin" narrative that's going around, and we'll end up with no Bitcoin. And it could be like a modern day 6102. That risk exists where Bitcoin parts from the individual and triumphs towards the central banks, triumphs towards Wall Street, triumphs towards the evildoers. And to your point, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I think that if all or lots of the retail Bitcoin ends up in the hands of fiat maximalists, then I think we've got problems.
Yeah, it's been a very interesting situation because, to your point, we were all thinking 150, maybe 250 by year's end, but it looks like these institutions that have come into play and kind of formulated this new foundation of Bitcoin have been playing some reindeer games, as I'm going to call it, and they're suppressing that price, which seemingly is causing a lot of retail to kind of check out. I think searches for Bitcoin on Google are the lowest they've been in a long time, and the price is certainly reflecting that. And what I think is particularly interesting about this story is Russia's central bank is also signaling it may open Bitcoin trading to those very retail investors. So my question for you, Adam, is how do you interpret that shift coming from a government that has historically been, we'll call it skeptical, if not outright hostile toward crypto in general?
Yeah, I've kind of been building this narrative in my mind, rightly or wrongly, that Wall Street or the government has figured out how they can participate without losing their upper hand. And so, it took them 12 years, took them 10 years, however long they've been investigating to truly understand, this is how we can play games and still, make sure we have the ace up our sleeve. And now they figure that out, Wall Street's adopting it, Wall Street's bringing it in, and all these other kind of governments are looking over, being like, oh, that's what they're doing. Okay, that's how we can take our piece. At the end of the day, when someone else has your collateral, you're exposed to them doing nefarious things, but you're also exposed to their lack of desire to go to jail for you. And what I mean by that is, like let's take Coinbase as a great example. Coinbase holds most of America's Bitcoin. If the government goes to Brian Armstrong and says, "Oh, hey, by the way, you need to give us the Bitcoin that you hold, or we're going to put you in jail, or we're going to, do something extreme that's going," then like you're trusting that Brian Armstrong wants to go to jail for you, which he doesn't, right? I don't think that's why any reasonable person gets into business. And so I think that we should assume that the government will come knocking for our Bitcoin at some point, maybe in our lifetime, maybe not in our lifetime, but it is the supreme asset on the planet. And the government's been known to want to take good assets. I think we've seen that throughout history. And so with Russia getting involved here, they're also a government known for wanting nice, shiny things, wanting good things. They're known for taking it at the expense of their people. And maybe they've just figured it out. And this lending thing, if I was building a narrative, I would certainly think, all right, step one, figure out how to get the people to give it up benevolently, and then let them buy it. Let them spend their hard-earned cash on this thing, and then incentivize them or give them a reason to give it back to us. That feels like, loans for Bitcoin and then lending for Bitcoin. They're going, the people of Russia are about to be spending their government-printed currency to buy Bitcoin, and then they're going to give that Bitcoin back to the central bank to get a dollar that the government prints. That's a good deal for the government. It looks like a good deal for retail as long as the government follows the rules. And if we trust, the Putin-era government to follow the rules, then have at it. I'm not sure I do, but time will tell.
Yeah. I don't even know if I trust the United States government to follow the rules at this point.
Yeah, I definitely don't trust the United States government to follow the rules. So I totally agree with you on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Bitcoin was kind of the new kid on the block there for a minute, and now it seems to be that has kind of transitioned, even though you and I know how important that is, but now it kind of seems to be AI, and I want to talk about that in our next story right now. You see, in Silicon Valley and Singapore, Meta is making one of its biggest AI bets yet, and it's not exactly subtle. You see, Meta has agreed to acquire AI startup Manus for more than $2 billion. That's roughly 22,753 Bitcoin at today's current prices, for those of you keeping score in harder money terms. Now, this is one of the highest profile AI acquisitions to date, and a rare case of a major US tech company buying a startup founded by Chinese entrepreneurs. Now, Manus is headquartered in Singapore and gained rapid attention earlier this year after launching an AI agent capable of producing detailed research reports, writing code, and building custom websites. We're not talking demos, we're not talking any kind of vibes, but actual output that people will pay for. According to people familiar with the company, Manus crossed $100 million in annual reoccurring revenue just 8 months after launch and attracted millions of users in the process. That revenue traction is the key detail here. You see, Meta plans to continue operating Manus as a paid service while integrating its tech into products like Instagram and WhatsApp. The startup relies on models from multiple providers, including Anthropic and Alibaba, rather than building everything in-house. And that flexibility is kind of part of the appeal. You see, for Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, this deal signals a renewed focus on monetizable AI after earlier missteps that emphasize scale and open source credibility over revenue. Instead of waiting for internal tools to mature, Meta is paying a premium for something already working. Manus CEO Chao Hong will report to Meta COO Javier Olivian, and the company's roughly 100 employees are expected to join Meta. For the markets, this reinforces a shift toward AI agents and subscription-based services as the real growth layer of artificial intelligence. It also highlights intensifying competition for proven AI products and talent, which could drive acquisition prices even higher across the sector. There is, however, a geopolitical wrinkle to all of this. Manus's Chinese roots may attract regulatory scrutiny, reminding investors that cross-border AI deals now come with political risk baked in. That takeaway is actually pretty straightforward. Big tech isn't paying for experiments anymore. It's paying for revenue. Bringing Adam back. Adam, Meta just paid over $2 billion for an AI startup with real users and real revenue. Amazing. Rather than just, another flashy model as we've seen before. What does that tell you about where big tech now thinks the real value in AI actually lives?
Yeah, man, this is so good. I think that we are seeing AI prove out this deflation model that we all know to be true, which is that, I think Jeff Booth coined it, everything trends to zero in a deflationary world, and I think that AI is proving that. I think that the AI model needs to be around the simplest form of use for people to be able to use it. I think the promise of AI is that all of us producers, all of us builders get easier, better ways to build, and those that can't have to figure out how to build. I think that we are on the precipice of the fourth turning. We're on the this is the end of the beginning for the digital for the digital era, and I'm so bullish on what the smart people will be able to create because of this. We've heard Mark talk about in the past, and this is maybe a downside to it. We've heard Zuck publicly state that he wants running ads on Meta to be just pick a demo, click a button, and the creative rips. You might get 1 million creatives for 1 million different impressions because of the AI models that they have and because of the way that they build their ad suite. So I think that what that means is we as humans are going to be a little bit more susceptible to good creative, to targeted creative, and we have to watch out for that. But at the whole, come on, how good is it that robots are going to be getting smarter and smarter and smarter, and that the ones that learn how to use the robots, and really what that comes down to is just critically thinking and being able to reason and problem solve, are going to be the benefits of that. So yeah, I'm bullish on that. I think it showcases that the model for AI is still retail. I'm happy to see that it's not just Meta is buying this so that they can offer good tools for their customers. And that's a good thing for, a third of the world who's Meta's customer, I think, at this point, which is a different issue that we can probably riff on for hours. But I'm bullish on retail being able to use AI.
Yeah, me too. And I'm bullish about companies actually finding out ways to use AI that makes money. Because this kind of felt like, if you're familiar with the old South Park episode with the underpants gnomes, it was like collect underpants was step 1. Step 2, we don't know. Step 3 is profit. And that's kind of felt like the whole AI play right now. But I think we're starting to figure out step 2, which is really encouraging. And this company, Manus, built AI agents that people actually pay for. As we said, this actually makes money. Meta plans to integrate them into Instagram, WhatsApp, and from a Bitcoin and self-sovereignty lens. Adam, does that actually empower users, or does this maybe further centralize control inside big tech platforms? Where do you land on this?
Yeah, I think as far as sovereignty goes, I'm probably not super bullish with this move. I think that anytime we have massive, big tech companies running the models for the individuals, then it's not good. But I think for those of us that care about being sovereign, I'm not personally the avid Instagram user. I'm not the target demo for these tools. What I am the target demo for is tools like this that I can control. And so I'm pretty bullish on, if you look at how the market works, we kind of have the black market, proves whether or not there's a legitimate use case for it. We then have investors rushing to see if they can make it work, to see if they can build it, to see if they can sell it. And then we have retail, FOMOing in without any cares for their security. And then you have the cypherpunks that come in and make it safer and sovereign. And so AI is on phase 2 or phase 3 of that. From a monetary perspective, we're on phase 5. The cypherpunks have won. The prophecy has been redeemed, and we are good. From an AI perspective, we're probably on phase 2 or 3. Retail is still right now, most people just use ChatGPT as a fancy Google search, and to make pictures of their kids look hilarious. We're probably better than that as a society. And so I think that as retail starts to really figure out how to start making meaningful changes to society with AI, that'll be the cue for the cypherpunks to come in and clean up the mess.
Yeah, no, and I just want to say right out front, I am not better than that. I use AI to make worse photos of everyone in my family, so that's what I will continue to be using it for. What an interesting part of this that can't be ignored is kind of the geopolitical implications, right? Like, given that Manus was founded by Chinese entrepreneurs and is now being absorbed by a US tech giant. So my question to you, Adam, is do you think AI is heading toward the same kind of geopolitical scrutiny we already see around chips, energy, and financial infrastructure?
Yeah, that's disappointing, but yes, I think we have seen the government, the government is on the verge of collapse around the world. The fiat lie has been exposed, Bitcoin is exposing that, and I think that from a political standpoint, people are fed up. We have access to information that is unprecedented. We now have the ability to move money that is unprecedented, and those are the two things that the government needs to control people. And so it's kind of cooked. And I think the writing's on the wall for all governments, not just the U.S. government, not just the Russian government, not just the whatever the other governments. It's just all governments are exposed to the lies that they do on a grander scale now. And my perception on how that looks is that as they verge towards collapse, they're going to be grasping at straws to make everything worse for people and to better themselves. And so this centralized type of activity is going to be problematic, I think, for us in the long run until the cypherpunks come and save the day. And so still optimistic, still bullish on the cypherpunk ethos, and I believe that there will be better sovereign AI models in the future as long as we can withstand the pain and not get wrapped up in the government's problems.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm actually going to put our Adam-backed Bitcoin symbol in the air. We need that cypherpunk energy to help us with this one. Now I want to move on here, Adam, and talk a little bit about you, your career journey, and what you do at your company. But the first thing I always like to ask all of our Bitcoin-related experts we have on the show is, what happened when you first got into it, right? When you first encountered Bitcoin, was it something that clicked immediately, or was it like a lot of us out there where it took some time before you realized that this wasn't just another tech trend, but actually something much bigger than that? What was that process like for you?
Yeah, it took me a long time. I was lucky to be excited to jump into Bitcoin right away. I found a niche pocket of business to be able to buy and sell Bitcoin early on, back in 2013, 2014. And then I had the dopamine hits of just getting to build in a space that was previously pretty much unbuilt. And so it was incredibly exciting. I didn't really come to understand what Bitcoin was, meaning a freedom tool, until 2019, 2020. And it shouldn't have taken that long because I was in the process of losing all my bank accounts in 2016, 2017. But I think that this Bitcoin journey that we get to go on is just an internal one, and it's so it's tailored to oneself. And so for me, seeing Bitcoin as a pet rock that always goes up is exciting. And then getting to learn and see firsthand how Bitcoin, specifically in self-custody, preserves my family's ability to have economic freedom. That transition, I can't pinpoint the time where it smacked me in the face, but I kind of just woke up one day as a raging Bitcoin maximalist, who's been somehow shut out from all the banking system in Canada. And I was like, oh my goodness, the answer's been here the whole time. And so it was at that time when even the company, shifted away from just Bitcoin accessibility and towards independence, towards freedom. And we put a lot of emphasis into our tools to make sure that our customers remain independent. And from that perspective, that just means very simply, we don't hold customer Bitcoin. It's crazy to me that we have all of these amazing Bitcoin companies in the USA, and every single one of them requires the customer and makes it the happy path, the happy path when you're building a product is the path that is easiest for the customer. And the happy path for every single Bitcoin exchange in America is custodial. And that blows my mind. And it's the easiest way, but it's not the safest way. And I don't think that Bitcoiners are here for an easy time. I think that we're here for a safe time. I think we want to be protected. I don't care how much you love the CEO of your Bitcoin platform. When the government comes knocking, your coins are done. And it makes me very sad that so many people, buy into the lie that just because you can withdraw means you'll always be able to. I have seen that to be false many, many times. We see it in banks around the world, and we see it in Bitcoin exchanges around the world. And I think that non-custodial Bitcoin is the next wave, and we need to work really hard to make that, better.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're 16 or so years into Bitcoin's journey, and we're always kind of figuring out there's new problems along the way that need answering. And that brings me to your company, Bitcoin Well. So my question for you was that born more out of excitement for Bitcoin's future potential, or was it this frustration with how difficult and these custodial on-ramps are for everyday users? Like, how did you come up with Bitcoin Well? What was that whole process like?
I'd say it was a natural evolution. We started with Bitcoin ATMs, and the reason Bitcoin ATMs are so good is because they're non-custodial by nature. And so that is arguably the fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin, because you put cash into a machine, your cash sits in the machine, and then the Bitcoin comes to your Bitcoin wallet. And so it's like you kind of have this nice closed loop. The problem with Bitcoin ATMs is they're incredibly expensive to run and so incredibly expensive to use. And so we took this Bitcoin ATM concept and kind of, put it online. And we wanted people to always be taking control of their Bitcoin. And for me, it doesn't really come out of rightly or wrongly, I rarely look at our competitors and be like, how could we improve this? Or how could we do this better? I'm always kind of thinking about society and thinking about, the world that I want my kids or my grandkids to grow up in. And just, I would be so sad if my grandkids are, if custodied Bitcoin is even a thing when my grandkids are my age. That would just be so disappointing. We would have lost the war if that's the case. And so, what better way to kind of kickstart the world that I want for my grandkids than to start building it before I have them, before they're around. And so I wouldn't say it's because I saw some kind of market opportunity. It's not because I saw some sort of writing on the wall. Well, maybe I did, but it was actually the opposite. It was the world is not going to be healthier if 5 major Bitcoin exchanges are custodying everyone's Bitcoin. We need to show the world that there's a non-custodial solution, that there's an opportunity for everyone to be able to buy Bitcoin just as safe, just as easy, and just as cheap as these other custodial platforms, but they get the better, the benefit of Bitcoin and self-custody. And so that's kind of what we're aiming to go after. I think this is the best path forward for our grandkids.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think being able to easily self-custody and get the UX user interface things kind of solved, I think better when it becomes as easy as a Venmo, that's when I think we're really going to see adoption ramp up in ways that we haven't seen quite yet. And we have a lot of Bitcoiners that watch this show and RoxomTV, obviously. So just so I'm totally clear, and I want to get the word out to all those Bitcoiners out there that are experiencing similar frustrations in their own custody solutions. So for someone hearing about Bitcoin Well for the first time, Adam, how do you explain what it does in the simplest terms, not exactly what it offers, but what problem is it actually solving, and who are the customers that this is really made for?
Our platform is made for Bitcoiners. I often say that Bitcoin Well is not anyone's first Bitcoin platform, it's their last Bitcoin platform, because we are not we have very, very good user experience if you know how to use Bitcoin. But oftentimes, if somebody's coming from a Coinbase or a Strike or a, whatever other Bitcoin platform that exists, They're not. They're looking for convenience. They're looking to outsource the responsibility of custody, and that's problematic. And so we're built for Bitcoiners, and we're specifically built for Bitcoiners who want to replace their bank with their Bitcoin wallet. I believe that the world is trending towards hyper-Bitcoinization, but I think we are a decade plus away from rolling into a Starbucks and paying with Bitcoin. Even in El Salvador, the promised land for Bitcoiners, it's like 50-50 whether or not you can pay with Bitcoin. I went to Walmart there a little while ago, and it was like, can I pay with Bitcoin? And they were like, oh, get the Bitcoin machine. Is the guy that knows how to take Bitcoin in here? And this is like, again, in the promised land of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so we want to kind of bridge that gap between hyper Bitcoinization and Bitcoiners who understand that keeping money in a bank is like foolish. And so helping people replace their bank with Bitcoin well is the vision. Today, that means going directly from your bank to your Bitcoin wallet, directly from your Bitcoin wallet to your bank. In Canada, it means you can pay your bills and send payments to your friends from your Bitcoin wallet. And that's coming to the States in the near future. And so really, it's our question we're constantly asking ourselves is our mission is to enable independence. How do we make our customers more free? And we want to do that by helping people replace their bank with their Bitcoin wallet.
Well, as a Bitcoiner myself, that sounds like a pretty sweet deal to me. And as I mentioned, I'm sure we got a lot of Bitcoiners in our audience today that you have really piqued their interest. And they're like, I want to learn more about Bitcoin well. I want to learn more about Adam O'Brien. So what's the best place I can send them to learn more about what you and the team are up to and where they can check out Bitcoin Well for themselves and get additional info and see if it's a right solution for them?
Yeah, I mean, bitcoinwell.com is the website, so you can head there. We're usually pretty good at like blogging and throwing updates and stuff on there. So you can read our blog. We got lots of cool stuff there. And then obviously just on X, I'm Adam O'Brien and at Bitcoin Well. So two pretty simple things to remember, but definitely would encourage everyone to go to bitcoinwell.com. I also, if anyone's watched me before, you'll know this. I love building in public. If you use something and you don't like it, at me, get in my DMs. My DMs are open, and we love to just hear feedback, and we like to build. We're not building for some like quarterly return. We're not building for some, investor return. We're building for society. We're building to make sure that our grandkids have, good access to real Bitcoin that will keep them free.
I love it, Adam. You guys are solving some real problems that are going to be a benefit to all of us in the future, and we absolutely loved having you on here. So we appreciate you sharing your insights and expertise, and keep fighting the good fight out there and building for the future. We certainly appreciate it. I hope to have you back real soon, and happy early New Year, my friend. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we'll see you in 2026.
Yes, thank you, sir. It's been a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate your time. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News. We'll be back with more stories, including China's continued military drills happening in Taiwan. You won't want to miss that. We'll be back right after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. We're going to get back into more of this morning's top stories. Next up, in Moscow and Kiev, a fragile peace process just got noticeably more fragile. Russia is accusing Ukraine of attempting to attack a residence linked to President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin claims 91 long-range drones targeted a site near Novgorod and where they were intercepted by air defenses there. Now, no evidence has been publicly provided as of yet, and the Ukraine says the accusation is completely fabricated. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed the claim as a tactic designed to derail peace negotiations. The timing is doing a lot of work here. You see, just days earlier, President Trump met with Zelensky and said talks talks to end the war were getting close, even though major territorial issues remained unresolved. Trump later said that Putin raised the alleged attack during a phone call. Trump described himself as very angry about it. Despite that, he still said a peace deal could be within reach. Moscow's follow-up, well, it suggested otherwise. After the call, Russia struck a defiant tone and warned its negotiating stance would now toughen even further. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the alleged drone incident was aimed at collapsing talks altogether. He added that Russia's military knows when and how it will respond. At the same time, Moscow says it will not abandon negotiations. Now that contradiction, it matters. Russia continues pressing its military campaign and has instructed forces to push for full control of Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region. It's a tough one. Now, the Kremlin also reiterated demands that Ukraine withdraw from remaining areas of the Donbas. Ukraine says Russia is laying the groundwork for further strikes on Kiev and government buildings. Both sides accuse the other of acting in bad faith. Russia currently controls just under a fifth of Ukrainian territory and says its forces are advancing. Ukraine says it cannot win the war without sustained U.S. and European support. Key issues remain unresolved here, including territorial control, security guarantees, and future troop deployments. Russia has said any foreign troops in Ukraine would be unacceptable. Ukraine is seeking long-term guarantees to prevent future invasions. Now, neither side appears to be ready to concede ground just yet, and that result is a peace process that was already delicate becoming even more uncertain. And at this stage of the conflict, uncertainty tends to favor whoever believes time is on their side. For markets, the takeaway is familiar. Geopolitical instability remains persistent, energy supply risks stay elevated, and prolonged uncertainty keeps pushing investors to question which systems are actually built to hold up under pressure. And in other news, off the coast of Taiwan, Chinese rockets are landing in surrounding waters as Beijing conducts its largest military drills yet around the island. For 10 hours straight, China carried out live fire exercises, launching rockets north and south of Taiwan. For the first time, China explicitly said the exercises were meant to deter outside intervention. That includes the United States and its allies. The drills began days after Washington approved a record $11 billion arms package for Taiwan. Taiwan's defense ministry says China appears to be simulating strikes on U.S.-made weapon systems, including HIMARS rocket launchers. China's state media released propaganda emphasizing Beijing's technological and military superiority. Images included amphibious assault ships capable of deploying helicopters, armored vehicles, and landing craft simultaneously. President La Ching-te says Taiwan's frontline forces are prepared, but stressed that Taipei does not seek escalation. Analysts note that China now holds both numerical and qualitative military advantages across weaponry and training. Now, this is an arms race Taiwan cannot win alone, and the stakes extend far beyond the region. Roughly $2.45 trillion in global trade passes through the Taiwan Strait every single year. Any disruption here impacts shipping lanes, supply chains, semiconductors, and global markets almost immediately. And this is why geopolitical risk remains stubbornly priced in everything from equities to commodities. All right, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're coming into hour two, breaking down the latest conflict between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Plus, Mr. M from the Mr. M podcast joins us to talk about El Salvador's Bukele hinting at staying in power for another decade. All that and more coming up back here on RoxomTV News when we return right after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. I'm Hank Hudson. Here's a quick recap of the major stories we covered during the first hour of this morning's show. The ceasefire in Gaza remains fragile as Israel and Hamas accuse each other of violations, even as the United States pushes to move negotiations into a second phase focused on disarmament, reconstruction, and governance. Meanwhile, new tensions over West Bank settlements, legal disputes involving Israel's leadership, and growing economic strain are complicating efforts to stabilize the situation. China has launched its largest and closest military drills yet around Taiwan, firing rockets into surrounding waters and explicitly warning against U.S. and allied intervention. With trillions of dollars in global trade passing through the Taiwan Strait, the escalation reinforces why geopolitical risk remains firmly priced into global markets. And peace efforts between Russia and the Ukraine face new strain after Moscow accused Kiev of an unproven drone attack on a Putin-linked residence and signaled a tougher negotiating stance. Despite continued diplomatic contact, unresolved territorial disputes and ongoing military pressure are keeping the path to a settlement highly uncertain. Now we're going to get to our top story of our second hour of today's show, as tensions inside the Saudi-led coalition fighting Yemen's long war have escalated sharply, exposing a widening rift between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Yemen's internationally recognized Presidential Leadership Council has canceled its joint defense agreement with the UAE. It has also ordered Emirati forces to leave the country within 24 hours. That move followed Saudi-led airstrikes on the port city of Mukalla in southern Yemen. Riyadh had said the strikes targeted weapons shipments arriving from the UAE and destined for southern separatist forces. Saudi officials described the operation as a matter of national security. They called it that security a red line. Saudi state media accused the UAE of backing the Southern Transitional Council, or STC, in a bid to undermine Yemen's unity. According to Riyadh, the weapons shipment originated from the Emirati port of Fujairah. Officials say the ships disabled their tracking systems before unloading cargo in Yemen, and Saudi media said the strike caused no casualties. But they warned that further action would follow if UAE-backed forces failed to withdraw from seized territory. Now, the STC has denied any wrongdoing, but its recent actions have changed facts on the ground. You see, the group, which seeks to restore an independent South Yemen, has rapidly expanded its territorial control. It has seized large parts of oil-rich southern provinces. That advance broke years of stalemate. And it has brought UAE-backed forces into direct confrontation with Saudi-supported Yemeni government troops. Analysts warn this raises the risks of a new front in an already fragmented conflict. It also publicly exposes how far Saudi and Emirati interest in Yemen have diverged. Now, Bloomberg notes this is the strongest language Riyadh has used toward Abu Dhabi since their split became visible back in 2019. At that time, Gulf stock markets fell. U.S. officials are now urging restraint. They warn the confrontation could derail broader efforts to stabilize Yemen and the Red Sea region. Now, why this matters to markets is because the financial markets reacted quickly to the escalation. Major Gulf equity markets fell, with losses in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and Saudi Arabia. Investors responded to the sharp deterioration in relations between the two of the region's most important powers. Energy markets, for now, remain relatively steady. That suggests that investors are not pricing in an immediate supply shock. But the situation is far from neutral. Saudi Arabia's warning that national security is a red line introduces geopolitical risk into a region central to global oil supply. There has been no reported disruption to production or exports at this time. Still, history shows that markets tend to add a risk premium when tensions rise between major Gulf producers. Especially when military action is involved and escalation remains possible. Shipping and trade routes are also back in focus. The fighting centers on southern Yemen and key port areas near the Bab al-Mandeb Strait. Now, that choke point is critical for global trade and energy shipments. Renewed instability could undermine recent efforts to stabilize Red Sea shipping. Insurers, shipping firms, and logistics operators are once again reassessing exposure. Political risk in the Gulf is also widening beyond Yemen. For years, investors treated the Gulf as a largely coordinated bloc. The public rupture between Saudi Arabia and the UAE challenges that very assumption. Reuters notes this is among the sharpest public confrontations between the two in years. And if tensions persist, questions will grow around coordination on security, energy policy, and investment flows. Defense and internal security spending expectations remain elevated, and escalation in Yemen reinforces assumptions that Gulf states will continue prioritizing military readiness. Finally, markets see fragmentation, not resolution here in Yemen, and the collapse of the UAE defense deal and the STC's advance suggest the conflict is splintering further. That reduces confidence in a durable political settlement. And it keeps a background risk premium attached to assets linked to the Red Sea and Gulf security environment. Now, Saudi Arabia and the UAE entered Yemen together back in 2019. Their shared goal was to counter the Iran-aligned Houthi movement. Now, over time, their strategies diverged. Reuters identifies 2019 as the turning point here. That year, the UAE formally drew down most of its troops, but it retained influence through the STC. And Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, continued carrying much of the direct military burden. That shift deepened strategic divergence between the two allies. And between 2019 and 2022, analysts say that those differences hardened into a structural problem. The crisis group describes divergent Saudi and Emirati strategies feeding directly into Yemen's political fragmentation. That fragmentation eventually produced the Presidential Leadership Council. At the core of the rivalry is control over the future of non-Houthi Yemen. Now, Saudi Arabia backs the internationally recognized government framework. It has pushed for unity under a centralized state structure. And the UAE backs the STC. And the STC openly seeks southern autonomy or outright sovereignty. Its territorial ambitions are incompatible with the Saudi goals. Now, this is why analysts describe Yemen as a theater where allies support competing local partners. The rivalry extends beyond Yemen. However, it includes disputes over oil policy within OPEC, economic competition as Riyadh challenges Dubai's commercial dominance, and diverging regional diplomacy in places like Sudan and Israel. Now, Yemen has become the arena where those broader tensions surface most sharply. That is what makes the current moment so destabilizing. The STC's advance brings Saudi and Emirati interests into direct collision. Airstrikes, rival deployments, and competing political projects are now playing out inside the same war zone. Now, the Saudi-UAE divergence reflects two different elite power and economic models here. In the UAE, power is closely tied to state-linked commercial and logistics actors. These networks extend well beyond the Emirati borders. Companies connected to the state, most notably DP World, have built a global footprint around ports, shipping, and trade corridors. Now, the research from the FT, Reuters, and the Crisis Group shows Emirati influence often aligns with securing friendly authorities around strategic maritime nodes. In southern Yemen, the UAE's relationship with the STC overlaps with economically significant port areas. And this reflects a model where security and commerce reinforce each other. Saudi Arabia's elite structure is different. Its most powerful actors are tied to energy, infrastructure, and Vision 2030 mega projects. Now, those interests prioritize territorial stability and broader control. And prolonged fragmentation in Yemen threatens Saudi infrastructure and internal security. Reporting from Reuters and the FT shows Riyadh increasingly eager to wind down open-ended conflicts, as such conflicts distract from domestic transformation and undermine investor confidence. Now, from that perspective, a southern secessionist project clashes with Saudi elite interests. This is why Yemen is more than just a battlefield. It is an elite fault line. Now, Emirati-aligned networks benefit from durable influence in fragmented zones. Saudi elites benefit from closure, hierarchy, and single authority that they can manage. Importantly, this is not a personal feud between leaders. Reuters and Bloomberg continue to describe high-level coordination between Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, but coordination at the top does not erase institutional competition below. Security agencies, economic planners, and state-linked businesses pursue outcomes aligned with their own models, and Yemen is where those pressures are colliding. And that is why crises like this keep reoccurring. Now, my beat on this is that this is what happens when alliances outlive their shared objectives. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are still partners on paper, but in Yemen, They're running two incompatible endgames here. One wants unity and one wants closure. Or one wants unity and closure, The other wants leverage and access. You can't square that circle forever. And what makes this dangerous isn't just the airstrikes or the rhetoric here. It's the fact that fragmentation now looks more likely than resolution. Markets can live with conflict. They hate uncertainty between supposed stabilizers. And when the pillars of a region start pulling in different directions, everyone downstream feels it. Yemen didn't suddenly become complicated. It's been complicated for years. And what's new is that the split is no longer quiet. And once it's public, it's much harder to contain. We're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we're going to talk about the U.S. continuing strikes in Venezuela and how President Maduro is responding. We'll be right back with that and more on RoxomTV News after this quick break. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Our next story takes us to the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific as U.S. military operations tied to Venezuela have moved from pressure to action. President Donald Trump confirmed that U.S. forces recently struck what he described as a big facility linked to drug trafficking operations. Trump said the site was connected to boats used to move narcotics, though he provided limited details on timing or location. Pentagon officials later said the strike was part of a broader campaign targeting maritime and air routes tied to alleged narco trafficking. Earlier this week, a separate U.S. strike killed 2 people aboard a vessel traveling along what officials called a known trafficking route. That action marked the 30th publicly announced U.S. military operation of its kind since early September. And according to reporting from the New York Times, the campaign may have resulted in more than 100 deaths, though that figure could not be independently verified. Legal experts and some U.S. lawmakers have raised concerns that the operations could amount to extrajudicial killings. The administration argues the strikes are lawful and necessary to disrupt organized trafficking networks. Now, this escalation runs parallel to broader pressure on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Washington has tightened sanctions enforcement, seized a tanker carrying Venezuelan crude, and deployed additional naval assets to the region. Maduro's government has condemned the strikes and ordered Venezuela's Navy to escort oil tankers leaving its ports. For markets, this matters in several ways. First, Venezuelan export disruptions raise volatility in heavy crude markets. Second, shipping insurers and vessel owners are reassessing exposure, pushing up freight and compliance costs. And third, operational enforcement, not rhetoric, increases geopolitical risk premiums across emerging markets. Historically, that combination favors defensive positioning and safe haven flows, and reminds investors that geopolitical risk doesn't arrive with a press release. It arrives with very real consequences. Now, meanwhile, during all of this action in Venezuela, their president, Nicolas Maduro, is dancing at rallies, strolling trade expos, and presiding over holiday ceremonies. You see, President Trump has warned that Maduro is running out of time, signaling consequences if he refuses to step aside. Washington argues that Maduro's 2024 re-election lacked legitimacy and has privately urged him to consider exile as an exit strategy. People familiar with Maduro say that option has been flatly rejected. Instead, Maduro is projecting confidence, betting that this escalation is just another bluff. Now, that belief is rooted in experience. He survived previous U.S. pressure campaigns, including the 2019 maximum pressure effort during Trump's first term. Allies describe him as a hardened political operator who sees himself as the heir to Hugo Chavez's anti-U.S. socialist project. Stepping down would likely expose him to U.S. indictments and sanctions, making power his best form of protection. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado says she believes Maduro will ultimately leave office. Analysts caution that forcing a transition is far more difficult than threatening one. Now, if pressure continues without a clear off-ramp, Venezuela risks becoming less a political standoff and more a regional security problem. And energy markets have long history of reacting quickly to exactly that kind of uncertainty. Now, joining us on today's program for our second hour to break down some of today's top stories and help us make sense of the bigger pictures and forces shaping money and power, we're glad to welcome back Bitcoin educator and host of the Mr. M podcast, Mr. M. Maurizio, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you. How have you been? Thank you for joining us.
Always a pleasure seeing you, Hank.
Oh,
Thank you for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is mine. Happy holidays to you as well. And soon, New Year's, we are excited getting into the 2026 year. But let's get going back here on our main story, because I'm excited to talk with you about it, Mr. M. So first up, when you see Maduro dancing at public events while U.S. warships move into the region, does that look like confidence to you, or is that the behavior of someone who knows power is the only thing currently keeping him safe? What's your beat on that, Mr. M?
It's always tricky, man. I mean, I'm not an expert when it comes to politics, U.S. and Venezuela and all that kind of stuff, but I'm never a fan of seeing conflict in general because people are in trouble always when these things are happening. And whenever we see tension, then the tension escalates through cost of things. You mentioned oil. Of course, there's going to be some repercussions. And, sometimes it's like an ego test, whether, like you said, someone is doing some things and they shouldn't, or they are just bringing the chest out, as we say. Not a big fan of seeing these things, to be honest. I rather see people talking more than showing, if it makes sense. So hopefully this is not going to escalate anymore.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on board with that. And, this is really nothing new to Venezuela. They've lived under sanctions and political pressure for years now. So my question for you, Mr. M, is, do you feel like these kinds of tactics of pressuring a country like Venezuela, do they actually weaken governments, or do they make them dig their heels even harder into the sand? Like, what do you think the effect is? Is this going to, do you think Venezuela actually is feeling this pressure, or are they going to double down and just kind of give this middle finger to the United States, is what seems to be happening right now? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think pressure works really well. When you try to get something too close, you might risk to, instead of controlling it, to lose it completely. So I'm not entirely sure pressure is always the best way to obtain things. I mean, call me old school, but I think sometimes chatting and even discussing via media per se, I don't think is an efficient way to get things done, if you know what I mean. It would be much easier to get into a context where people can talk one another, and sometimes he said, but I've read and he tweeted kind of thing, and it's never ending well. So encouraging people to talk more as opposed to pressuring and maybe using third party or tricks to try and control, I don't think it works. And I'm not a big fan of controlling in general. I don't think it works.
I couldn't agree with you more. Every time I've ever pressured any ex-girlfriend of mine to stop spending so much money on Amazon, they just get mad at me and spend more. So I totally agree with you. Real civil discourse is the way to go here, but that's not, unfortunately, how the world always works. And this standoff, as we kind of mentioned earlier, affects a lot of things, including oil markets and everyday life. So over time, Mr. M, how do you feel living under constant political and economic pressure like this can change how people trust money and institutions? What are your thoughts on that, especially being a Bitcoin expert?
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, it's tricky because, like you said, there are repercussions. Whenever there are situations where someone wants something or they're trying to control or whatever, there is always a repercussion. And you can see, like Venezuela, I mean, their currency has gone really down compared to, for example, the dollar, which is also volatile, but not as bad as some countries, for example, Venezuela. So we can see repercussions, especially we can see embargoes, or maybe there are things they don't end up in a way that we wish they would because of a master plan per se. So whenever the economy is confronted by, for example, America, which is a huge power when it comes to ruling the planet, well, then sometimes they try with the iron fist, even though I'm with you, I don't think it's the way, but sometimes maybe it's the only way. I'm not entirely familiar with what's happening 100% with Venezuela and the US, besides these episodes we've seen, but I'm sure there is history. And whenever there is history, there are positions and there is, repercussions coming in. It's never a good thing because sometimes, there are countries, they have things maybe the US wants. It could be minerals, which now you've seen silver and gold and gone bananas. It could be oil, it could be trades. Maybe they have to go through a route for their ships to deliver things. It's always tricky. And sadly, currencies are getting impacted the most. I mean, we've seen the Venezuela, I think it's down 99% versus the dollar or something like this. So they take a hit pretty severe. So hopefully they can sort things out because, currencies, they debased anyway because we print them, we put more supply in the market. The last thing we need is conflict, right? To go and just fuel this fire, which is inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mr. M, in situations like this, where the Venezuelan economy is strained and the state is very powerful, can Bitcoin really help everyday people, or does the government usually clamp down first? Is Bitcoin maybe a solution here for the people of Venezuela during these, we'll call them trying times right now?
100%, I believe so. Like if you look into the El Salvador, for example, situation, and if you think about if your currency is debasing so fast and if inflation is rising so quick, well then for you it's faster to park your sweat equity or your currency, your money into an asset, as I believe Bitcoin could save you, because God knows what's going to happen with the currency in Venezuela. Maybe it's going to drop another 20% because you might think, oh, it's down 90% versus the dollar. It can't be any worse. No, it can. So if you have savings in your bank account, right, you are always, no financial advice, but what I would do, I would try to park my sweat equity or my money into something that does not debase as fast. Of course, Bitcoin is volatile, but I don't think it's going to be as volatile as, think about Turkey, for example. We've seen they lost so much purchasing power. So again, depending on where you are, that's why Bitcoin is getting adopted in those places where inflation is a major issue. In the US, they say it's 2 or 3% is more likely 10% a year, but there is places where maybe it's like 90%. So definitely can help, I believe so.
Yeah, absolutely. We always get caught up in the volatility, or people get caught up in the supposed volatility of Bitcoin. But if you look over every 4-year stretch, it only goes up and to the right. So as long as you can kind of, manage those short-term fluctuations over time, it's the hardest asset out there, and you and I both know that very well. And I think Venezuelan could really take some tips from the country in our next story that I want to talk about right now, because in San Salvador, El Salvador, President Nayib Bukele says he is open to staying in power for more than 10 years. Bukele made the commitment during a video interview with a Spanish YouTuber, saying that if the decision were up to him, he would remain president for another decade. He added that he had originally agreed with his wife to leave politics in 2029. El Salvador is scheduled to hold its next presidential election in 2027, which would determine leadership through 2033. Now, under recent constitutional changes pushed through by a Congress controlled by Bukele's party, he would be eligible to run again. Now, those reforms abolished presidential term limits, moved the election timeline forward, and extended presidential terms from 5 to 6 years. Now, legal experts inside and outside El Salvador have questioned the legality of those very changes. The country's constitution explicitly bans consecutive presidential re-elections in multiple sections. Despite that, Bukele won a second term in early 2024 by a landslide. His popularity remains exceptionally high, as the 44-year-old former publicist has built support through a hardline crackdown on crime that has dramatically reduced murder rates in the country. Now, supporters credit him with restoring public safety and stability. Critics argue the cost has been civil liberties, citing mass detentions, alleged torture, and deaths in custody. Now, Bukele has previously referred to himself as the world's coolest dictator, a label he now says he does not take literally. He insists he has no intention of establishing a dictatorship, and Bukele says the ultimate decision rests with the Salvadoran voters. Now, from a broader market perspective, this story sits at the intersection of popularity, security, and institutional limits. El Salvador's experiment with strong executive power has delivered measurable results on crime. It has also raised fundamental questions about constitutional guardrails. Now, for the global investors out there watching the country's Bitcoin forward policies, the takeaway is nuanced. Political continuity can bring stability, but concentration of power always brings long-term governance risks. And markets, much like voters, eventually demand both results and rules. Bringing Mr. M back. Mr. M, Bukele's supporters point to lower crime and safer streets. How do you personally balance those results against concerns about changing the Constitution and concentrating power? Well, what are your thoughts on this? It's an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a trade-off, right? I mean, first of all, I'm a big fan of El Salvador. I've never been, but I have many friends. They just go there a lot, and they have so many good things to say about the country and Bukele itself and how much has changed, right, ever since he took over. Of course, there's always a trade-off. I mean, I live in the Emirates, in the UAE, right? So I don't think I'm a fan of democracy as much as before, because I think sometimes you need someone who says, okay, enough, this is how it's going to be. And if you don't like it, you can always move. Okay, it's not for everybody, but I think I'm a fan of Bukele. I think I would trust him to say, hey, you know what? You voted me. I'm gonna fix some issues, and he showed that he already sorted. I mean, safety among other issues that they had in El Salvador. So there might be a compromise over there. They'll have to, whoever voted him, they'll have to agree and say, okay, now he's taking charge, so we have to trust that he's going to do the best for delivering what he promised. So it's a bit of a tricky one. It's like the best way to phrase it would be, if you want to make an omelette, you have to break some eggs, right? You cannot make an omelette otherwise.
Right.
So as long as it doesn't take too much of people, because that would be not easy, but I think there's going to be a degree of trust, if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, you really, I mean, if you're going to do the whole I'm not a dictator, but I'm a dictator thing, you really got to believe the guy in charge is almost of a saintly nature. And this particular case is super interesting because Bukele often argues, and he's not wrong, that voters support his approach. He was reelected in a landslide. But it does beg the question, because historically, Mr. M, do you think strong public approval protects democracy, or is it maybe sometimes hide a deeper risk, in here? Like, what are your thoughts on that? It's an interesting question right now.
It is, and I also believe, I mean, whenever people want to win the election, they'll say anything to get votes, right? So, I'll do this, I'll do that, trust me here, trust me there, but you never know what they're going to do, and they're going to elect other people that you don't even know they wanted them in the first place. I mean, you might have an idea based on the campaign, but nothing is ever guaranteed. So even the democracy itself, it's always like a leap of faith, because you never know what they're going to do once in power, right? So they'll campaign for, I don't know, depending on what the election is going to take place, let's say for a year, but then you don't know what they're going to do, because again, you have to trust them. So I think at some point, if you have a situation like maybe the one in El Salvador, Bukele is going to say, hey, you got to trust me, because I'm not going to use the democracy route. I'm going to do what I want. And you've chosen me to represent you. So, which is kind of what happens in here anyway. Like you don't have as much as, I guess, power as in Europe, for example, in the US, where you are electing someone and that someone is going to deliver. And if they won't, well, they won't be elected again, even though it's always, I mean, I'm Italian, I was born over there, and trust me, the person you vote is going to promise you things they are never going to do anyway. So I might as well go down to a route where I say, you know what, I like the person, I know what they want to fix, power to them. And if it doesn't work, maybe next time I'll try with something else. But like you said, it's always a risk, because you never know what's going to happen.
It is. And, I want to kind of scale back and look at the big picture here, specifically in Bitcoin terms, right? Because I guess my question to you is, do you think that Bitcoin adoption works better when it's pushed forward by a strong leader like Bukele, or when it grows slowly through systems that limit any one person's control? What are your thoughts on that? Like, Bukele's obviously accelerated Bitcoin adoption quite a lot in El Salvador. But is that really the best thing for Bitcoin? Or is it better if it's more of a grassroots thing that grows slowly and surely? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a fantastic point. I feel like whenever someone is imposing something, even if that something is amazing and someone is imposing me to use it, I don't feel I want it. You know what I mean? Like, imagine if you are a vendor and out of a sudden someone goes, you have to use that one. Well, I don't even know what it is. I don't want it, but you have to because the law says so. So I don't think that's the best for adoption. I think adoption works best when people are getting there on their own, saying, actually, this is a good thing. Can I use it? Yes. But you can have both. You either have some sort of a pressure in trying to use something like Bitcoin, which is super amazing, but the government won't let you, Or you have maybe the opposite situation where someone like Bukele is actually forcing you to use it because he sees the beautiful things that Bitcoin has, but you haven't seen them yet, and you are feeling the iron fist, like we said earlier. And he said, from now on, that's it. It's going to happen. And matter of fact, we've seen people protesting, saying, "I don't want Bitcoin. I want to use whatever currency they had before." And again, it's always a compromise. If you would ask me, I would rather choose a natural adoption from the bottom up, where people are understanding why Bitcoin needs to be used and what problem is solving, as opposed to someone saying tomorrow, that's it, that's what we need to use. I mean, look at fiat currencies, right? Nobody has chosen them. Someone one day said, we're going to use fiat currencies. We're going to stop. In 1971, Nixon said no to the gold, right? So that there used to be gold reserve for the money, money is Bitcoin, for the fiat currencies to be printed. And someone said, enough. I decided we're not gonna use the gold anymore. We're just gonna print when we want. And it's another example of someone's decision over what people need. So again, happy to see El Salvador adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender, but on the other hand, I don't think it's going to work as well as if they would have decided to proactively say, hey, we want to save, for example, in Bitcoin. We want to sell goods through Bitcoin. But eventually, even if something is being forced on someone, I think they will see the value. It might take a little bit longer, but I think Bitcoin is inevitable.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like eating broccoli when you were a kid. I was like, I don't want broccoli. My parents were pushing on me. I'm like, I don't want to touch it. But as an adult, I get to make my own choice to eat broccoli. And I'm like, broccoli's pretty good and it's really healthy for you. I should probably be eating broccoli. But with that being said, as we've seen from the Michael Saylors of the world, the Nayib Bukeles, it is nice to have spokespeople out there keeping this new asset class in the news and helping people gain understanding and familiarity to it. But I agree with you. It's better that we hear that from afar, let people make their own decisions, and the best technology wins out and the best currency wins out, or asset, and we both know that is Bitcoin. All right, we're going to take a quick break here with Mr. M, but when we're back, we're going to be chatting about Metaplanet's latest Bitcoin buy, so stay tuned. More RoxomTV news coming your way after this quick break. Welcome back to RoxomTV News. Currently, the Bitcoin price is around $88,000, and that brings us into our top Bitcoin story of this hour. That's coming out of Japan, where Metaplanet is making it very clear this is not a hedge, a trade, or a publicity stunt. The company just acquired 4,279 Bitcoin in the fourth quarter, spending roughly $451 million at an average price of about $105,000 per coin. Now, according to Metaplanet President Simon Garovich, that brings the company's total holdings to 35,102 Bitcoin. Now, that makes Metaplanet the fourth largest Bitcoin treasury in the world and the largest in Japan. Garovich says the company has achieved a 568% Bitcoin yield year to date, which tells you this isn't being treated like an idle balance sheet decoration. Earlier this month, Garovich and Metaplanet's director of Bitcoin strategy, Dylan LeClaire, laid out the thinking behind the approach at Bitcoin MENA in Abu Dhabi. Now, their message was pretty simple. Bitcoin is not an asset on the balance sheet, it is the balance sheet. They explained how Metaplanet grew from roughly 1,000 Bitcoin to more than 30,000 in a single year, and why Japan's yield-starved market is uniquely positioned for Bitcoin-backed financial innovation. Now, that includes tools like perpetual preferred instruments and volatility harvesting, built in the idea that Bitcoin is the foundation, not the byproduct. And as institutional demand grows, Metaplanet is positioning itself as Japan's primary Bitcoin gateway. Earlier this year, Michael Saylor said Metaplanet would become the most valuable company in all of Japan. And at the current pace, that statement looks less like hype and more like a roadmap. The company also reported $27.1 million in Bitcoin income generation revenue in Q4, reinforcing that this strategy is already producing real results. And if you want a sense of how seriously Bitcoin native this approach is, Metaplanet stock can actually be traded denominated in Bitcoin on Roxom, the first market where traditional equities and Bitcoin treasuries trade directly against BTC. Now, the takeaway from this story is pretty simple. Japan waited decades for yield. Metaplanet decided to build one in Bitcoin. We're bringing Mr. M back to chat about this story. Mr. M, at a time when a lot of Bitcoin treasury companies have underperformed or faced real skepticism in the market, Metaplanet is still doubling down and treating Bitcoin as the core of its entire strategy. How unusual is that level of conviction, and why does it matter in this moment? What are your thoughts?
That we've seen Michael Saylor basically scooping up as much as possible. Like strategy owns 3.2% of the entire supply, which is a lot. And by far is the largest company, because then number two, you have Marathon with 52,000 Bitcoin, more or less, which is way different from almost 700,000. So there's a humongous gap from the number one and number two. So seeing Metaplanet today coming out and acquiring such a huge amount of Bitcoin was actually refreshing, because we want, as much as I love Saylor and strategy, I welcome many more companies because we want it to be decentralized, right? So as many people and many companies are acquiring this asset, the better it's going to be. And it's also nice to see that it's not just him coming up on Monday every week, kind of keeping us alive, but there is other companies, right? And like you said, number one in Japan. So super excited to see them coming forward again. The gap from number one, number two, even with Marathon, is huge, but still 31,000 Bitcoin, it's quite a bit. So really happy to see them acquiring.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's nice to see it getting spread around a little bit, because even with their haul now of over 700,000, I think strategy still only has like barely 3% of the entire Bitcoin market. And as that price increases, you and I know it's going to be that much harder for any single corporation or institution or government to get more Bitcoin. So I think we'll be okay, but it is nice to see someone other than Michael Saylor continuing to buy amidst a lot of the market uncertainty that we're seeing right now. And Japan itself, has dealt with decades of low growth, low yields, and limited upside in traditional assets. And now we're seeing a company there go all in on Bitcoin. So my question for you, Mr. M, is why does that macro backdrop make Bitcoin especially compelling for Japanese firms right now?
Well, I think it's a fantastic question. I believe there is going to be space for every kind of strategy in every country. So we've seen also in the UK with Smart Web. So there are many companies now trying to pop off and say, hey, whatever Saylor has done works, and we want to replicate that into a different country. So that's why seeing Metaplanet coming up in Japan is going to be good for them, but also for Japan itself, because someone could have exposure to Bitcoin through another channel. And maybe some people don't want it. Some people want it. It's free market. So if some people would rather use Metaplanet to acquire Bitcoin, for example, via the stock or whatever they decide to go through, great. It's more a way for us to spread adoption. So I'm actually excited, and I think it matters because it's going to help adoption in general. Because whenever I'm a big fan of self-custody, and for me, Bitcoin is self-custody, but I understand that it's just me. And many people I know, matter of fact, some people in Dubai I know very well, they sold their self-custody to acquire an ETF for safety reason, for responsibility reasons. Everyone is doing whatever they think is best for them. So who am I to impose? It wouldn't be great for me to say, oh, Bitcoin is decentralized and yada, yada, but you can only have it in self-custody. Well, then it defeats the purpose of decentralized. And so I like to see those participants coming in, but I'm also convinced that the best way, maybe even to kind of get to know Bitcoin, could be through a vehicle like this, but I am 100% confident that the best way to acquire and own Bitcoin is in self-custody in your hands. But again, it's not for everybody. And maybe for someone who's just starting, having the option to maybe go via Metaplanet, for example, in Japan, or Smart Web in the UK, or Strategy in the US, could be a fantastic way to familiarize, because I'd rather have that kind of vehicle than no Bitcoin at all. So it's kind of a compromise, if it makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we can all agree that, well, if you've been in this space for a while, self-custody is the way to go. But these are operating as on-ramps for people that were previously not in the space. And whatever gets people kind of acclimated to the temperature of the Bitcoin space, when they're in there long enough, they're going to be looking at other options outside of these ETFs and, buying into Metaplanet stock or strategy. So at the very end of the day, it is helping push the cause forward. And as we know, Bitcoin, for pretty much everybody, takes a little bit of time to kind of wrap your head around and understand it and understand why it's important. And at least we are pushing the narrative further. And I think these are important for doing that. And Metaplanet right now has been talking openly about using Bitcoin's volatility to generate income. As the saying often goes, volatility is a built-in feature of Bitcoin. So they don't just sit on it. But now, given how financialization of assets has gone wrong before, where do you think the line between smart innovation and repeating old mistakes is? Is it maybe playing a fool's game to try to apply old methods to Bitcoin, or is that always going to be kind of an inevitability as it becomes institutionalized?
I think we will see some companies, I'm not talking about Metaplanet or strategy, I'm talking about some companies are going to fall because, we've seen in the past, leverage is the most, I think, risk you have, because whenever you have Bitcoin and you want to play the volatility, you can say, okay, don't worry, I have your Bitcoin. Look at banks, right? What the banks do, they just have your money, but they got who knows what with the money. So that could be a risk, because whenever you don't have custody, you are empowering someone else to say, oh, maybe I can do a leverage long on this thing, and if I lose it all, oopsie, kind of thing. So hopefully those companies are going to conserve it and say, hey, let's not just do funky business with it, we're just going to store it and then eat, meaning Bitcoin is going to do it his own, because we've seen, a matter of fact, I was thinking about this morning before coming on the show. You asked me a few months ago where I would see Bitcoin at the end of the year. And I think I said 170, 180. Look how off I was. We were barely at 90,000.
We all were.
This thing is super, and I was wrong. Like, I was projecting a much higher price because this thing is volatile, right? And sometimes volatility comes on the south. It's not always north. So as long as those companies are not doing funky business and they're saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to gamble on the price on a long leverage. As long as it's, because, it's easy. We've seen, FTX have done it. Like, they play with people's money, right? So this is the risk. And that's why people are saying, oh, paper Bitcoin, because of course they're going to make some choices that if you have it in your own hands, you can say, no, I'm not doing that because I am in charge. But whenever you empower someone else, then the risk is there. But Metaplanet strategy, I'm confident they are not going to do that. And Bitcoin is volatile anyway. So even if you just hold it like I am, you're going to experience it. So it's part of the asset, I guess.
Yeah, if you're trading volatility, there's always an innate risk there. That is, I don't want to call it gambling, but nobody really knows. And you said you thought it was 170. I had people on the show that thought it was as high as 400,000 by the end of this year. You just don't know. But we do know that it's not a gamble. If you just buy it, you self-custody and hold it, the track record is about as strong as anything you'll find out there. And, as we head into 2026, there's a lot of people that think, the Bitcoin bull market, as we call it, is going to extend through this year. We're done with the 4-year cycle, and people are looking for a lot of new info to figure out how to best position themselves for this next part of Bitcoin's journey. I know, have an amazing podcast that talks about Bitcoin. You talk to some of the greatest creators in the space. We're curious is what can we expect from the Mr. M podcast as we head into 2026? What do you got in store for us? Because everyone out there should be taking a look at it if they haven't already.
Well, thank you. I'm expecting, like you said, an extension of the cycle. I think the 4 years, if it's not dead, is going to die. Actually, we are going to close. I don't want to jinx it, but today is December 30th, depending on what country you are in now. But we are towards the end of the year, and we might see, which is very likely, a red closure. Because in order to close the year above last one, we're supposed to be at 93,400, more or less, which I don't think we are.
Right.
So that means we're going to break another pattern. By the way, another pattern was broken because we've gone above the all-time high prior to the halving. So every cycle is never the same, but there is a rhyming situation where it's familiar enough for us to put this thing into boxes. I am expecting, since this injection of new capital, we've seen treasury companies, we've seen countries like Bukele, we talked about it earlier, we've seen different kind of investors. I'm expecting this asset to behave different. In fact, if you remember gold, when the ETF was launched, I think it was in 2004, September, if I'm not mistaken, the price has changed ever since because you are empowering a different type of investors to kind of play a different game. So I am expecting potentially an extension in 2026 with a new all-time high, but I'm also expecting a different behavior. Matter of fact, it's already happening. It's already behaving different because I don't think 126 was the top for the cycle. And even if it was, because it's possible, well, then we are going to see diminishing losses. It's not just returns. Like if we have gone from 70,000 to 126, we're not going to see a 90% correction because we have not gone into the banana zone, right? So either way, I think it's going to stay volatile, but maybe more mellow. And I'm expecting a new all-time high in 2026 for sure. But hey, my track record was quite off the last time you asked me. So don't trade on this, right? Because I don't know. Nobody does.
We were all on that same train. I mean, every single guess that we got about where we thought Bitcoin would be at the end of the year, I think almost exclusively were over 120K, and rightfully so. Bitcoin until October was soaring, so it was not unusual, I think, for a lot of us to feel that way. But as we enter this year, I want to know really quick, before we let you go, Mr. M, what's going on with the Mr. M podcast? What do you got in store for your audiences this year? We're excited to learn what we can expect in 2026.
It's going to be amazing. So I'm going to be traveling to a lot of conferences. I'm going to do Prague. I'm going to do Vegas. I'm going to do many nice destinations. I'm going to do interviews more in person because I like to talk to a guest in person when possible because most of my guests are in US or Canada. So for me that I'm in Dubai, it becomes tricky to interview them in person. There's going to be more in person. And then I have a couple of tricks up to my sleeves. I have a couple of new shows that I can't spill the bean yet, but it's going to be exciting. More like a weekly kind of consistently event with special experts coming on the show, going to like deep analysis and charting, because I think what's most interesting about Bitcoin to me at least is nobody knows, like you said, where it's going to go, but we have so much data we can put our hands into it. So kind of more kind of geeky conversation into data and more in person.
Very cool. I know you have that great program where you interview people in cars. You said deep analysis. I'm hoping that means this next iteration is going to be in a submarine or something, because that would be pretty cool. But I'm sure whatever you got in store for your audience is going to be pretty great. And for those in our audience that are interested in checking it out themselves, if they haven't already, what's the best place I can send them so they can check out your most recent episodes and learn more?
Well, thank you. YouTube, I mean, I do broadcast everywhere, so audio only, but YouTube is probably the best because you can also see the video. So Mr. M Podcast on every social, but YouTube is probably my favorite.
Yeah, me too. Well, you're one of my favorites to have on the show, Mr. M. So we're so glad that you were able to join us today, and thank you for lending your insight and expertise. It's always an absolute pleasure having you on the show, and we can't wait to have you back in 2026, my friend. I think it's going to be a good year.
Anytime. Always happy to be with you, Hank. So happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year to you as well, and we will see you in 2026. Thanks so much for your time, Mr. M. We'll see you next time. All right, gang. That is a wrap for today's Tuesday episode here at RoxomTV News. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, make sure to follow, like, and subscribe to RoxomTV, RoxomTV News, and me at Hank at RoxomTV on your doom-scrolling platform of choice. And we'll be back tomorrow to wrap up 2025 with our final show of the year until 2026. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you tomorrow to wrap up 2025 in style. Cheers. And I'll see you then.